Hello, everybody, and welcome to How Well Are You, the talk show, where we are ending the stigma surrounding mental illness, one show at a time. Whether you're watching live or if you're watching by replay, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We're just so excited this evening. I have an amazing guest. When I tell you she is amazing, she is absolutely amazing. And so we just want to talk about generational trauma today. We're going to be talking about generational trauma. And I tell you, this is a very interesting topic as it relates to mental wellness. And I cannot think of a better person. I cannot think of a better person who is capable of actually delving into this, breaking it down, and letting us know exactly what we need to know. She's going to provide us some awesome information, give us some awesome insight, give us some practical tips that we can use as we continue to mull over this whole subject of generational trauma. Oftentimes we don't understand why things are the way they are. You get what I'm saying? But as I said, we have someone here this evening that's going to break it down to us. And I'll tell you what, if you just stay with us, you are going to get some golden nuggets. So I'm not going to keep her waiting. She's going to be coming in a minute. I'm going to give her a proper introduction, and then you will hear from our guest this evening. All right. So here we go. Hey, Pastor Briggitte,
Wow. I'm so
how you
excited.
doing? I'm more than excited, and I just want to
Right.
share with the listening audience how I connected with you.
Okay.
Pastor Briggitte and I are actually were a part of the Black mental health series in that was in May, that was doing
And then, yeah.
Mental Health Awareness Month. Yes, and this series was hosted by the Black Speakers Network. And when I heard her, I was like, OMG, I have got to have her on the show. When I tell you, and y'all already, I know you can feel her energy emanating already. She is so energetic. But let me give her a proper introduction. So, Pastor Briggitte P. Brown is a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Spirit, Soul, and Body Clinical Services, Inc. in New Britain, Connecticut. She has over 20 years of experience and she specializes in trauma therapy, providing both clinical and spiritual support to her clients. And I love that. We ain't gonna go, that's a whole nother topic. So we're not even going to go there. Uh, and I love this. We were talking about this earlier. She is an Afro Latina from Dominican descent. I think
Yeah.
that is so unique. That just intrigues me. So that means Pastor Briggitte is fluent in English and Spanish, more than
Spanish.
likely.
Mhm.
She is a proud product of the New York City school system, overcoming challenges to graduate and further her education. She
Yeah.
ultimately graduated from the University of Connecticut with a master's degree in social work. She actually became a licensed clinical social worker in 2018. Check this out. She's a woman of many hats, y'all. In addition to her role as executive pastor alongside her husband at Right Now Ministries Inc. I love that. Right now, right now. She hosts the Authentically Healing podcast, where
Yeah.
she shares her personal journey and helps others heal from emotional distress and trauma. And we're going to make sure that she plugs you into that so you'll know where to find that. And I watched her on her podcast or on YouTube, and I tell you, she just brings it every time. She's fire. So
Yeah.
thank you all so much for joining us today as we delve into her inspiring story and insights. Pastor
Woo! I'm
Briggitte.
so glad to finally like connect via virtual, but I know we spoke over the phone. We had a long conversation, but God just knows what he's doing, right? He works with people, and this is what he is now doing with us because we have like the similar passions and just the journey of healing from trauma, that this topic is so relevant to both of our lives. So thank you so much
Yes,
for having me.
absolutely. You are welcome. And thank you for saying yes. Thank you for
Yes.
saying yes. So I want to start by asking you this question.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define generational trauma and its impact on individuals and families?
So it's so complicated because there's so many layers of trauma where getting to the root of it is going to take us 5 to 10 lifetimes to even heal from, right? So the most simplest definition of generational trauma is sitting with the stories of
Mm,
that generation,
mm,
taking the lid off of silence and creating a space for us to verbalize our experiences without judgment. You see, you can't even, that's not a simple definition.
I
And
got you.
that's not unpacking what
Yeah.
it means to heal generational trauma means that I have to allow myself to make space and validate.
Mm.
But we don't want to do that.
Why? Why?
Yes.
Why don't we want to do that? Since you mentioned that.
Because that means that we have to own a piece of that, of the part that we played to creating trauma. Or even, and it could be, intentionally, but unintentional, because there has not been any platform for us to talk about. Like if
Mm,
I would have known what my mother went through, what my grandmother went through, what my great grandmother went through, what my aunts went through, I mean, I just know of what I've heard while I was in the other room playing with my cousins. You know what I mean? It wasn't
mhm,
something where we were being sat, in the Bible, it says that for ye who are spiritual, restore such a one, right? And
mhm.
and for the older women to impart in the younger. But where are we creating space for that? And I just feel that there has been such a disconnect between generation to generation to generation because of all the things that we've went through, that by the time we're done just existing and trying to survive, we're done, we're dying young, right?
Mhm.
Sickness, disease, we was talking about this when we were having our initial conversation, is that we emotional trauma brings on sickness and disease. And that's where it was for me when I had stage 4 cancer, and it was all because of all the holding in, that your body responds to where your mental is, and also the patterns of not eating healthy, the things that we're not incorporating exercise and movement, and really it's just a lack of knowledge. People perish for a lack of knowledge, and I feel that within the generations, if we're not giving knowledge and standing at the fore of like, listen, this is what we have to teach so that you can move forward. I think for me, one of the things that I'm learning as a mom of multiples, right? I have 7 kids.
Wow.
And just being a mom for so many different age groups is exhausting. But one thing that I'm learning from my older kids to now my younger kids is emotional intelligence and learning how to communicate effectively. Where in the beginning, you can ask my older kids, they got the 18-year-old, 17-year-old version of a parent, which really they're now getting a healthy version of parenting and connection. But I had to sit with their feelings and the experiences that they had, because I didn't know that spanking was not the first resort, or any resort at that. Spanking was just because I was frustrated and I needed to get it out. But you learn present parenting and communicating and things that the little ones get away with. They're like, wait a minute, you used to put us on punishment, you used to do this, you used to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I did not know any better. But now we know better. So now we have to move forward. But I had to sit with their stories in order for me to heal their hurt, and also learn how to continue to heal my story.
So I'm glad because I was going to circle back around to that. Wow, this is already loaded. This is already loaded. So go more in depth into when you say sitting with their stories. Give me some examples. Give us some examples when you
So
talk
I'll give
about
you some examples. There were some stories with and I know my oldest daughter is listening in because she just gave a high five in the beginning. But I'm learning so much of what it is to heal in the moment. Like, this is live TV. This is not later on. This is like in the moment. There were ways that my husband is calling. There were ways that I injured her when it came to her emotion. And
hold
now
on 1 second before you finish that. Hold that thought. But what I want you to do is go back a little bit farther with sitting with the stories in the generation prior to you, and bring us to you and your experience with your children now.
Right. So just when I was younger, I was always very I was always very verbal when it came to I knew how to express myself because I used to journal. So I learned how to express myself through writing, and I was reading, so I was learning. And then I recognized that some of the ways that my family would communicate was through passive aggressiveness, and no one really talked about the elephant in the room. We just enabled it, or we avoided it. And I was that rebel kid because that was the kind of like the identity that I took on, where I was proving a point. I had to defend the cause. I had to advocate, and this is what's happening. And nobody was listening. But it wasn't until I moved out and I had my own family and I started learning about effective communication. I'm like, what? This is not, first of all, because I come from a Dominican family, it's not okay for kids to talk back or to question anything. You just do as you're told. But that's not okay when I am being affected by some of the behaviors and patterns that are happening that nobody wants to talk about. So I became very defensive and reactive. So I was always that reactive kid that was cursing you out, that was fighting, that was putting you in your place. And I just didn't care. It's just like, well, listen, I'm gonna let you know. And again, nobody was teaching me how to effectively
Right.
communicate
Right.
the trigger that I was feeling. Nobody
Yeah.
was validating that.
Yes.
So because I'm walking around defensive, now I go to school and I'm reacting in the same way, because now what I'm learning is that I was always in fight or flight mode,
Yes.
always being around, like, not knowing what's unpredictable. You got to guess what people are thinking and what can I do to please so that I can get attention. And having an alcoholic dad in the home, and who was totally, I mean, he had major depression, had and coped with alcoholism, and nobody was talking about it. I was a teen trying to like normalize, well, what's going on? It's like, oh no, he's fine. No, he's not fine. This is not okay. But nobody took the time to say, Briggitte, you're right. Things are not okay, because we're going on as business as usual. We don't have time to sit and pause, because again, life happens. We still got to work. We still got to maintain the house. We still got, and I'm like, I'm a teenager, young adult, not able to compartmentalize all of this because nobody is communicating. So that pattern followed me into adulthood, where I'm always the go-to person, I'm always the go-getter, I'm always the fixer, and this is what we're doing, this, and I had to learn, like, you have to be vulnerable. Nobody got time for vulnerability. What is that?
So that also leads to something else that you mentioned. And before I ask you to delve into that, I just want to shout out to one of our speaker cohorts who's on, Deborah Ford. She was also part of that Black Mental
For the
Health Speaker
platform.
Series. Yeah, so want to shout out to Deborah. So you just segued into something else that I wanted to talk about when you said taking the lid off the silence.
I know. And
Which
that's
is,
hard,
yeah, yeah. Because we're
especially
talking
when you,
about that vulnerability, which
yeah.
is taking the lid off the silence. Go ahead.
Right. And taking the lid off of silence, what I'm learning now is, just because I can take the lid off of my silence doesn't mean that other people are ready for that. And just learning how to still hold space for them, and letting time go for them to get to that point. But and I'm still kind of learning that, because there's some people on a list that I'm just having a really hard time with, the offenses that continue to happen because you don't want to deal with your stuff,
Mhm.
but you want to put it on other people. And I'm all about boundary setting in this season. And I just gently scoop that crap, that garbage, right onto other people's lawns. And I own my part, but
Yeah.
until people own their pieces, then you don't have to stay in silence because they're not ready to own their own truth. And that's a delicate balance that can stifle you from really walking in your full freedom of taking the lid off of your silence because other people are not ready for those stories,
Wow.
you know? And I know I had um really bad depression. I mean, and then it was really PTSD. And I would go through these cycles of like I thought I was gonna have a nervous breakdown, because it was just like a season of laboring where it was fine, and then I would spiral down and have these panic attacks, and I wasn't sleeping at night, and then I would be so hyper vigilant that my body would respond with just like dropping. So I would be laid out for days, not wanting to do, going through depression, then going back up to hypervigilant and reactive, and then go right back down to depression. And I realized, Briggitte, you are holding way too much stuff in. There was nowhere where I can go to just release. And when I started therapy, I started realizing how important it was for me to have my own safe space where I can just start channeling my experiences and my feelings. And that's how the Authentically Healing podcast kind of evolved. I wasn't even thinking about a podcast. My daughter, who's 25, she lives in Chicago. She's a journalist there. And she said, Ma, why don't you have such a story, I can help you put this podcast together. And my husband, he's an engineer. So he's like, listen, Briggitte, I can help you put this together, because I didn't know anything about that. But what I did know was I knew how to write and I knew how to convey my story, because I'm a storyteller. And that's how the podcast evolved, because I wanted someone to hear that and feel like that's exactly what I need. Even if I'm tuning in and listening because I don't have a real safe space in my real life, but at least if I plug into this podcast or this YouTube video, I can be in my room and still learn how to, regulate myself, how to express my emotions, how to implement positive coping skills, and then just how to start taking the lid off of the silence. Because stories, when stories are told, healing manifests.
Yes.
And I mean, and you just have to own all of it. I have a very, very, at risk past, because again, I had to learn how to navigate my own life. And then I became, I got saved, I had my family, and I'm thinking, yes, I'm new in Jesus' name and all of that. But I had not dealt with the trauma of the old Briggitte before she was saved and everything that came with that. And it wasn't until cancer where God was like, listen, we dealt with the physical, you healed in Jesus' name. We dealt with the spiritual, but now we got this soul part of you that needs to heal. And sitting with the things that I took part of, I took part in that.
Yeah.
It was a decision that I made. And you have to sit with that piece of you and pick it back up and say, you know what? I have to heal this part of me. And then there's another piece, and it's like, oh my gosh, I got to heal that part of me. Because as I started healing, now my daughters and my sons began to heal. And
so we want to, I'm sorry, because I definitely want you to get back to where you were before I took you back to the sitting with the stories generations past. But before we get to that, you triggered something else that I want to ask you. For our listening audience, can you share some common signs or symptoms that indicate the presence of generational trauma? Because sometimes we just think, we don't pay attention, and we just think people just got bad attitudes because they got a bad attitude, or we think somebody's doing something because they're having a bad day, but then they turn into having 20 bad days and bad days and 100 bad days and years of bad days. So then that's an indication that it's just not a bad day. There's something else going on. So when we talk about generational trauma, share with us some of the common signs or symptoms that indicate that a person is dealing with generational trauma.
Family reunions. Ooh, anytime there is any family activity and you feel activated. And you know what? That's why you have to be in tune with your body. Your body knows the experiences that nobody wants to talk about. Your body knows that Uncle such and such touched me inappropriately. Your body knows and remembers I went to my mom and I said this and it was brushed off. I went to my dad and so your body knows, and we react and become reactive, but it's really your body going into that fight or flight. So if your heart is pounding, if your hands start sweating, typical
Mhm.
anxiety kind of, you get defensive. Those walls pop up. You're not vulnerable anymore and soft. You got to defend. Here's that aunt that's going to say, I done gained too much weight, or when am I getting married, or when am I going to make her an auntie? All those things are part of, excuse me, go over there. All those, my granddaughter and my daughter, all those things are part of the process of activation. I always say it's Bridget, you're activated. You're a little stressed out right now. And we don't realize that this is what's happening because of something that happened that I can't talk about it, you know? So those physical symptoms, or
Yeah.
you isolate. Maybe you're the one that isolates and you get depressed and you go into another room, or you just don't want to be bothered. And again, it all depends on the person. I was the reactive one. I was the one that I was fighting.
I got you.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so in your line of work, how how what have you observed in specific patterns with how generational trauma affects different generations
Right,
differently?
right. So I've been a social worker for all different types. I worked with kids, I've worked with substance abusers, I've worked with families and couples, and now I'm really like, my niche is trauma clients. And I didn't realize that this was going to be the expertise of population that God would have me to, but He needed me to see what trauma looked like,
Mm.
because He knew that I'm good with countertransference and, like, discernment. And I was recognizing a lot of the stories that I was hearing were the stories of myself. And I was identifying myself with a lot of these stories. And in that, I would just make a note of that for my supervision with my therapist. And I realized that, oh my God, this sexual abuse client is actually triggering me. This mother who doesn't validate or understand her children is validating me. It's triggering me. This relationship problem that's happening with um this husband and wife. Oh yeah, I know. And so the counter transference was, it wasn't counter transference because I wasn't allowing it to affect me, but I was making a note of how that story was affecting a piece in me that was not healed. And it allowed me to explore that more. And that's where things started deepening. And I realized, like, oh, I didn't even think I was a trauma victim. I didn't think I was perpetrated on, because, the guy was 35 and I was 15 years old, but I was just looking cute. And I thought he was attracted to me, but that is not normalized. But within the family, it was normalized, it was allowed. So I thought, oh, okay, so 15-year-olds can date 35-year-olds.
Yeah.
But that's not that. So that's how I started recognizing that, wait a second, there's more to this than what I thought. And I had to learn to sit with those experiences, because now it's bringing up all these experiences that I never dealt with. Right.
That is
Or you become paralyzed,
yeah.
and it's like, you get that wind taken out of you
Yeah.
when you identify with someone, and
Mhm.
and it's like you can't breathe, you can't
Yeah.
talk, because that's where you've been. You
Right.
don't have words for the
Right.
experience and the shame.
Right.
Let's not bring in shame and guilt.
I know. I know. Exactly. Wow. This this whole generational trauma thing, it's a big deal, and I'm so glad that you mentioned earlier about, you know, the no platform, and thank
Right,
God that we have platforms now
right.
where we can bring these subjects to the forefront and we can talk about them openly. Many people are willing to be very transparent, as you are, and we can
Yeah,
appreciate that, sharing your own experiences, because so many people think they're alone and that they're the only
right,
one, even though they kind of know they're not. But until you hear
right.
somebody else say, this happened to me or that happened to me, then you kind of think that it's just
You're the
you.
only one exactly. You're the only boat out in the ocean by
Right,
yourself.
right,
And silence, listen, this is why people are in substance use. That's why people are in psych wards, because their story is too big to talk about. But if we talk about it, we have stories. There was, and you know what? And I learned that as a pastor, in the church, girl, there's so much generational trauma within the church walls, and that's supposed to be our safety wall. That's supposed to be where we come to receive Christ and to heal in community. But that community, sometimes because of their own trauma that we don't want to talk about, but we want to dance around it, we want to shout around it, but we're not really talking about it. And mental health, and in the platform with the Black Speakers Network, that was my thing to talk about, is like, let's normalize trauma healing in the church, because that's where everyone gathers for information. The church was where African American people, right, Black and brown communities come and they trust within that community before they will trust a therapist or a
right,
doctor. Or
right,
so let's equip the body so that
right.
we can talk about how this particular experience is causing me. I remember I have as many kids as I have. Postpartum depression is real. And I had postpartum a couple of times, and it was a very dismissive kind of feeling of like, I'm not praying hard enough, I'm not fasting hard enough, and it's like I'm this feeling is real. That experience that I just had was traumatic for me,
Mhm.
and glazing over it to just shout and pray is I have, this is like, I couldn't keep up. I kept telling my husband, I feel like I can't, like, and that was just between last year and this year. I was like, I can't keep up. I feel like I'm, remember the story of Lot and his wife,
Mhm.
where he's supposed to be going into this new land, and the wife looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt. I was feeling like, wait, I'm so affected by the past that I don't know if I'm capable of stepping into this new what. Because
Wow.
right now I'm wounded. I don't know how to move out of this trauma. And being in that mental capacity and like that mental state, I remember I'm a parent. What am I teaching my kids about expression, about expressing their feelings, about pushing those feelings out of their body. I didn't have the vocabulary and the actions to give them until I started just sitting and making space and taking that lid off little by little, you know?
Wow. Wow. This is a topic that we can just go on and on and on and on about, because there's so many facets to it when you talk about generational trauma. And then when you bring that whole church thing in, and that's a whole nother dynamic. And you
Mm-hmm.
being a pastor, you're seeing it from a pastor's viewpoint, but then you're seeing it from Bridgette's viewpoint,
Yeah.
where I've been. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want you to talk about the role of resilience in
Mm.
breaking the cycle of generational trauma. Because at some point, we got to say the buck stops here.
The book stops here. I
Somebody
know.
has to do something to turn this thing around and turn it in another direction. So we're going to take a short break, and when
Okay.
we come back, that's what we're going to talk about. Y'all, we're here with Pastor Briggitte P. Brown. As you can see, as I told you, she has the goods, and you can see scrolling at the bottom of your screen her podcast, Authentically Healing podcast. And I tell you, just go and just listen to her. I mean, you'll be enriched, you'll be educated, you'll be encouraged, you'll be inspired, because one thing that I love about her is she is the truth. So we will be right back after this short message. Hang on. All right, so we are back with Pastor Briggitte P. Brown, and we are talking about generational trauma. And before we broke, yeah, broke, before we took a break,
A break.
listen, y'all, it is what it is. Before we took our break, we said that when we come back, we're going to talk about the role of resilience in breaking the cycle of generational trauma. So I'm going to step back right now, and we are just going to give you the floor, Pastor Briggitte, and you just pour out of your heart on how we can begin breaking this cycle of generational trauma.
So the way that you break generational trauma is to become real to you and to your story. And something about generational, when you look at when you look at this um, as generational trauma, you oh hi ma when you look at this as generational trauma, you you get to allow yourself to empathize with what happened and why someone else didn't have this insight that you now have, right? So I got to a point where I remember when I was younger, I'm like, I'm never gonna do what my mama did, and I'm not gonna be that parent. And then I had kids and I became that parent. So I learned that if your patterns are not changing, or if you're not aware of your patterns, then you're going to naturally just glide right into that and do that. So the things that I used to do is what I'm learning now. Okay, so my daughter needs emotional connection, where sometimes being fully vulnerable with my kids has been a struggle. And that's one thing that we talked about, is that having to be emotionally transparent, because my mom hid her emotions, my grandmother hid her emotions. It was always very strong. Affection wasn't really, hugging and kissing. Kids is not what you do at past a certain age. And then, you grow up with this emotional neglect that you recognize has been affecting you. So now that you know, okay, this is what emotional neglect looks like, this is what trauma looks like, this is what my experience has been. So now what am I going to do to shift out of that pattern in order to now become a beacon of light for the next generation? I may not be able to do much for the past generations, but I can do something about the future generation. So like with my kids, my grandkids, and moving in a place of openness. And also those things, I don't know if Debbie's on, but Deb, kind of put us a little bit on the spot. My daughter called with a need, and having a transparent moment. And she didn't need my sarcasm. She didn't need me, being smart with my mouth for that. She didn't need me to say I do so. She just needed to hold the space for her.
Pastor Briggitte, check your connection because you're freezing up on us a little bit.
Am I?
Yes.
Am I good? I'm still freezing?
Yes, just a little bit. It's in and out. We can hear
How about
you.
now? You hear
Uh,
me?
yes, but I can see you're freezing on the screen a little bit.
1 second. Let me switch.
Yeah, because we want to hear everything you saying. Everything. Oh. Yeah, we definitely don't
I'm
want
still
to.
here.
Yes, you're still here.
Am I frozen?
You're not frozen.
Okay. So my daughter just said, I'm still here, Ma. But
Yeah.
she's always wanted me to just hold space. And whenever she would do that before, and even when she was younger, I would automatically go, oh,
You're freezing again. Hmm. Oh boy, she's freezing again. She's saying something that somebody needs to hear. Everything was going great, and now all of a sudden, she is freezing. Can you hear us, Pastor Briggitte? Can you hear us? Yeah, exactly. Let's see if we can communicate with her that she's freezing again. Okay.
oh, am I good now?
Right now you are.
You see
Yes,
me?
you are right now.
I'm freezing or
Yes.
I'm good. Okay.
So go right ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't know what, for some reason, the Wi-Fi keeps going back and forth. I apologize for that. But when
No
I had,
apologies necessary. Technology.
right. So when and before I would always be personalizing it, making it about me, where in that moment, it's not about me, it's about her. So I had to learn how to communicate to her and not even say anything. How do you want me to help you? What do you need from me right now? Not let me fix this, let me figure it out. But what do you need from me right now? How can I hold space for you? And learning how to do something different. So just taking baby steps. The fact that we are resilient, the fact that we can look back at our story and see all the pitfalls that we overcame shows that we have the resilience. So we can withstand healing generational trauma and learning a new way of doing things, so that when we leave this earth, we're leaving it more refined, you know? So, yes.
Wow. Wow. You said we can leave the earth more refined.
Yes.
Elaborate on that a little bit. I like that.
So just like what it is, you know, the way we used to do things, or the way we were used to doing things now, you know, my mom um didn't have the opportunity to go to school and like finish, because she sacrificed her education to work in the store with my dad. And all she used to say to me is, you know, you need to go to college, you need to go to college. But when I was a teenager, I'm like, you talking about go to college and you didn't even go to college? Or you telling me that I'm trying to work through all this stuff that I've been through and you want me to go to college? Like, I didn't have the means to go to college at the time, but I figured it out because I was resilient. And because that was all she kept saying is, you're going to go to college, you're going to do different than how we did it. At first I used to get offended, because I'm like, you know, but y'all ain't doing nothing. You know, we all out here, you know, doing the same thing over and over. And then when I graduated and I saw the pride in their faces, and then I allowed myself to sink in a little more into their stories and realize that they migrated to this country and didn't have a lot of the opportunities that their first generation child had. So when they were saying, you're going to go to college, you're going to do this, you're going to be better than us, they said it from a stance of, okay, so we came over from an impoverished life and we worked hard at the bottom so that you can stand on top. But in that transition, there was a lot of trauma that came out of that. And my dad basically succumbed to it, because the depression and the alcoholism, because of the loss of his business, his bread and butter. You come from poverty to middle class in America, and you lose the only thing that validated you as a human. And now you got to go work as a janitor. Oh no, that doesn't come it just easy, you know. But when I allowed myself to take the anger out, the unforgiveness, the resentment, and allowed myself to just sit in their shoes and understand what they did, now I was already steps ahead from what they've ever experienced, or even what I experienced. So I positioned my 25-year-old at a very young age. I used to read with her. I had her in good schools. I put her in instruments. I mean, I just sewed into her. Me and my husband, sewing. And she knew when she was graduating from 5th grade that she was going to college. She's going to Northwestern University. That was the school that she wanted to go to. She wanted to be a journalism. And seeing my mom with me at her school orientation was such a proud moment for both generations, that the refining, leaving this generation better than what it was before, is what this looks like. Is that my kids should be way ahead of me. You got credit at 18, 20 years old. I didn't have credit till 5 years ago. Okay. When I finally purchased the house, and working so many years because I just wasn't prepared. We didn't talk about credit. I had a credit card without a job when I was 18 years old from school. You know what I mean? And I didn't think about credit. It's like, what? If we don't got money, cash is king. I don't want nothing. Savings account in the bank is going to take our fees and this, and mismanaging. And again, as I learned, I taught them. And now they're in such a different position. So when I leave, I know that that's going to continue to enhance and continue to move on.
Wow.
But I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. We got too much work to do, okay?
That part in that order. Say less. Wow.
All right.
Wow. And you know, resilience, we as a people, brown and black people, are resilient people, period. So when we start talking about the role of resilience in breaking the cycle of generational trauma, if we first do number one, like we said at the beginning, we have got to, number one, we got to keep the conversation going first and foremost.
The
We've
conversation.
got to keep the conversation going, because what people don't know, they don't know. And
Right.
you know, as we mentioned earlier, you know, about the signs and the symptoms, you know, like you said, we're at the family reunion and you looking at Uncle Joe and you feeling some type of way and you emoting some type of you know, emotions or whatever. Nobody's not understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And it's because all of this time has passed, and because of the silence, as you said, well, can't tell nobody because they ain't gonna believe me. And so I'm 18 now, I'm 20, and I tell you what, I remember what you did, son. And
Right.
I'm feeling some type of way, and I'm old enough to defend myself now. And
Yeah.
you keep on, I might just blast on you like right now in the middle of the family reunion, you
Right.
know. And but you're still like dealing with it, because we're still dealing with this whole keep silent, you
Yeah.
know, just don't even bring it up now because
Yeah. We don't talk our business,
yeah,
and
yeah,
whatever
it
happens here
happens.
stays
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
But people are messed up, as you said, you know. That's why we got the alcoholism. That's why we have the drug abuse and all kinds of ways that it plays out in
Yeah.
people's lives, because they have not been able to get this stuff out. So
Right.
as we come to a close, I cannot believe
I
we're
know. I can't believe it's an hour already.
this is crazy. There is definitely one question that I would love for you to answer, and then give us three things that you think are very important moving forward as we continue to grapple with this whole subject and idea of generational trauma. But one thing that I would like for you to answer is, as a society, what steps can we take to raise awareness about generational trauma and promote healing as a society?
Right. I would invite people who have influence, who have opportunity to meet with people, to just begin normalizing the reality that, I hear you. I know this is happening. I know that when I was a community organizer, in New Britain, I used to go into communities where I knew that they were out of state landlords that were not taking care of their properties, and that your environment is not healthy or safe. So what are we going to do together as a community? So someone has to be a tool to just bring awareness and to validate that this is happening. Because when we ignore it, um, then nothing is going to change. We're going to continue to create the abuse and be oppressors in the system. So, okay, so maybe it's not um, this person or that person, but if I'm not saying anything or doing something about it when I have the means to, I'm also becoming an oppressor in this um, in this society. So everyone has to say something. When I was younger, I remember I couldn't do anything without being caught by the grocery store owner. And by the time I got home, all my business was being told, because it takes a village. And right now, the village may not feel so safe because of all the things that are happening. But we got to take our power back, and we take our power back one story at a time. So as you own your, yes, emotional trauma is valid and just as bad as physical trauma. And that's such a great point, because I felt the effects of my emotional trauma, not realizing, I didn't think that my other daughter is coming on. I didn't realize that I was a victim of, emotional anything, because again, I had two parents. We ate every day, we had a roof over our head, we had stability, but emotional stability was the missing link to that. And it affects us. So when you know better and you do better, pass on the information. And whatever platform you have to share your own story in its fullness, good, bad, and indifferent,
Yeah.
share it. And when you share it, you take the shame out, you take the guilt out, and you get strengthened. It's just such a natural glow, a natural essence of who you are, because each part of me plays a part in who I am today. So
Wow. Okay, so that said, wow, I'm just letting it all like
digest,
absorb. And Deborah, it's so true. Deborah says about the emotional trauma is as valid as physical trauma. And that in itself right there is a whole nother talk
yeah,
show. Because when we start talking about emotional trauma, like we just want to dismiss it. Like because
right,
you
right,
you can't see what's going on in my mind. You can see
right,
what's going on outside, so we can address that. But because you can't see what's going on, that's why so many people
right,
are tore up from the floor up, because
right,
it's
right.
it's an inner thing, and it's the inner healing that needs to take
Mm-hmm.
place. But as we're saying, the only way that it can take
Right.
place is that we have to keep the conversation going. We have to normalize the conversation.
Normalize it.
So give us three three takeaways that when we talk about generational trauma and how we can break free. Give us three tips, give us three takeaways, give us three practical things that we can do to get this ball rolling and keep it
Right.
rolling and never look
So,
back.
so one of the important keys is you don't have to stay stuck because your story is connected to someone who's stuck.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Rewind. One more time. One more
You
time.
don't have to stay stuck because your story is connected to someone who's stuck. This is where we cut in soul ties. You got to disconnect and know that I'm taking my power back. I'm in my lawn with my fences, and you're in your lawn with your fences, and this belongs there. So just process of elimination is going to allow you to free yourself and open your soul up to healing. So that is definitely the first step for you to know that you don't have to stay silent and stuck because your story is connected to other people who are silent and stuck. Number two is your whole story is valid and it
Mm.
all matters.
Mm.
The good mistakes, the bad mistakes, the mistakes you just fell into, all of those were your choices. And I'm going to own all of what I did. And when you make that space, now you get to take the silence off and the guilt and shame follow as well.
Mm.
So the guilt and shame will go as you own your whole story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Authentically
Right.
healing.
And when you heal, the generations will heal. You're
Exactly.
refining it. You're refining it. When I was younger, my family was, because of colorism in the Dominican Republic, oh, marry someone light skinned, you're gonna refine the race, you're gonna refine the race. And I'm like, oh, I love is love, and whoever I love is, and I love the darkest African American ever, that my dad wasn't even gonna walk me down the aisle. And I said, no, I like this dark chocolate. And I'm telling you, refining is not physical. It is emotional. It is the essence of who we are, not the outer. The outer comes and goes. What matters is, where is your soul in all this healing, the very essence of who you are. Don't be a hollow shell version of yourself. Live your life loud and full, but you can't do that until you own all of you. And sometimes sitting in the things we didn't like is that's what needs to heal. So that's what you transfer over. That's the wealth transfer that we
Yeah.
transfer over to the next generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, that's as always, I always go back and watch, because when I'm, doing the show, I'm over here, multitasking, trying to make sure everything is flowing the way that
Uh-huh.
it needs to be flowing. So some stuff I miss, but I have to make sure and go back because I don't want to miss anything.
Right,
Pastor
right.
Briggitte, I want to thank you so much for coming on this evening and sharing with our listening audience about generational trauma, how defining that whole thing for us, and uh, telling us some of the signs and the symptoms
Mhm.
of um, of the presence
Yeah.
of generational trauma, and sharing examples, and sharing your own story, and being very transparent in your own story, and obviously you have some great support from your family, because
I
a few
do.
of them have definitely popped in to
Yeah.
let you know, hey mom, I'm here, and your own mother, hey, that's my daughter, I'm so proud of her. And so I thank you so much for allowing us the privilege to be able to hear your voice, a much needed voice, for such a time as this. And I want I want to have you back on again, because I want to go to that whole thing. And that was one of my first shows
Mhm.
about um, being in a Christian, and this whole idea of therapy, because you touched on that, and I didn't even want to get into
That's a
that.
whole nother. Oof.
There. We ain't going there. And not only a Christian, but did the pastor say her therapist? So we're gonna talk. We want to talk about that too, and I'm definitely gonna bring you back to talk about that, because we're dealing with that whole
Right,
misnomer
right, right.
well, you're like you said, you ain't praying hard enough, you ain't fasting hard
Right,
enough,
right.
you're doing something right, yeah. But Jesus in therapy, it'll work. He ain't mad. He ain't intimidated. He is not intimidated. So again, we want to thank you so much. We want to thank our listening
Yeah,
audience for being here, for your interaction, and we are just looking forward to hearing some great feedback from people who have listened and who've watched and have taken some things in. I know I have taken in a lot because the truth be told, we've all gone through situations
right.
because of what has been handed down from
Yeah,
former generations,
I
and
know
no one dared to break, if you will,
the
the
generational curse.
generational curse. So
Mhm.
it's time now. It's time. And thank God, a lot of people were tripping about COVID, but COVID
Oh,
sparked a lot.
it was the best thing that happened in
It
the
was the
Brown
best
house.
thing. Exactly.
Real conversations happening in the Brown
Exactly.
house. Oh yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. So again, we want to thank you so much. You all, this has been Pastor Briggitte Brown, and you see that you can. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention to you to let our followers know how they can follow you. What's the
Ah,
best way for them to follow you?
yeah.
How can they
So
stay connected?
if you go on authenticallyhealingpodcast.com, that's my blog. I have contact information there. If folks subscribe on at authenticallyhealingpodcast.com, they will get a free ebook on 6 levels of soul healing. And also just tuning in on all streaming platforms at Authentically Healing Podcast. That's my baby. That's like my public journal. And I just give real information, real experiences where I'm activated and I have the microphone on, the video is on, and I am really walking people through what I am experiencing, connecting. Because it's like, listen, yeah, this is what this feels like. This is what this looks like. This is what I go through. And I just want to normalize mental health healing. We
Absolutely.
can heal when we make space for our stories.
Absolutely. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Pastor
so much.
Briggitte. Yes, it has been a pleasure. Time just went by entirely too
I know
fast.
it did.
This has been amazing, amazing. So
Mhm.
I am Cynthia Howell. I am your host for How Well Are You, the talk show where we are ending the stigma
Yeah,
surrounding mental illness one show at a time.
I love it.
Join us, not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday, because we're here every first and third Tuesday. But we're here today on Wednesday because yesterday,
It's
as
a
you know,
holiday.
was the 4th of July. But I said, I got to get you in here. I got to get you in here, and I got to get you in here right now. So we're gonna come Wednesday. So, but join us Tuesday after next for another great show. And in the meantime, in between time, everybody stay well.
Thank you.